Hello, my name is Sarah Jacobson, and today I would like to talk to you about acceptable fonts to use when creating content. Whether you're a curriculum designer or an online course creator, the font you choose makes a big difference in your learner's ability to read the material. I'd like to touch on four major points of accessible font usage, including our reason for using accessible fonts, some fundamentals of font typefaces, recommended fonts for content creation, and other ideas to consider when choosing a font. So, why would you need to use acceptable fonts? Well, as a designer, you are legally obligated to. Using acceptable fonts will keep you in compliance with the Americans with Disability Act guidelines. Instructional designers work hard to ensure that important content is resonating with the learner. That would be pretty difficult to do if you can't read the content. Keeping accessible fonts in mind when creating content will promote inclusivity, allowing students the best opportunities to acquire the skills and knowledge needed. Your content can be consumed by more learners. While these specific tips help with those visual impairments, dyslexia, and other needs, we all benefit from using acceptable fonts. Here's a brief overview of the typefaces you'll hear about the most. There are a few variations to this list, and all of these basic typefaces have subsets, but here's a brief description of each. Instructional designers rely heavily on sans serif and serif fonts for their content. These are the most acceptable fonts to use. Here are some examples of the different fonts that are included in those typeface categories. Pay close attention to those serif and sans serif columns compared to the rest. Which fonts do you think would be the most recommended for instructional designers? Take a moment to pause the video here if you would like to reflect. So, now you know about typefaces and fonts. We understand the reason behind using the accessible fonts. Now, which fonts will ensure that we are being inclusive? When you're looking for a font to use, keep these ideas in mind. You'll want your font to be widely available. You should be able to use this font on the majority of your creation tools. That way, you aren't using several different fonts on the same project. You'll want to try to avoid fonts that can cause letter confusion, such as this lowercase l and this uppercase I that look the same. B, P, D, and Q are confusion for learners with dyslexia. So if you know this is a large population of your learners, consider a font with distinct differences in those letters. Ensure that the font is clearly legible to the majority of those users. Some reliable options that are widely available are listed below. There are more, these are just a few. Some other considerations when choosing a font include text color and contrast. There should be a noticeable difference in the background and the text that's on top. Yellow text on orange background may not be the best option. Ensure the font looks readable on a variety of devices. Consider the spacing of the letters as well as the spacing between words. Too little space makes it difficult to determine the new word, while too much space will make your text harder to read fluently. Consider the size of your text. I encourage you to explore options for zooming into text whenever possible. This will help learners who may need larger text. Here we have an example of a text on two different platforms. This font style ensures that the important information is able to be obtained on both the phone and laptop versions of the presentation. Now you know the why and the how of acceptable fonts. Here's an example of two bodies of text relaying the same information. Which example best fits what you have learned about acceptable fonts? Take a moment to pause and reflect. Ultimately, there is no one-size-fits-all font. A font that works best for one person may not work the best for the next. But by following these guidelines, you'll be able to create content that is accessible to many people.